and welcome to the 905er. Outbreaks of measles are being reported on the rise in the news. Public health is alarmed at the surge in numbers. An almost eradicated disease is seemingly back with a vengeance. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is he talking about Texas? I'm not. I'm talking about right here in Ontario. Public health units are reporting rising numbers of measles among unvaccinated populations across the province. In Peel Region, we are seeing 4 cases reported, with one being at Pearson Airport. In total, around the province, 512 cases have been reported in 13 public health units, with 42 being hospitalized. Of those 42, 36 were children. Just a few facts about the measles virus before we begin this episode. The measles is one of the most communicable diseases on the books. One carrier of the virus can spread it between 12 to 18 times before showing symptoms. And speaking of, symptoms of measles include fever, cough, a runny nose, red watery eyes, and a red blotchy rash. It is also easily preventable through a vaccine that is virtually 100% effective. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, one would think that this shouldn't be a story. We've learned lessons about the efficacy of vaccines, haven't we? Well, maybe we haven't. Are we complacent about thinking of measles as a childhood illness that we all get over, even at the risk of those who could face long-term complications from the virus? This is important to consider, as summer is just around the corner, with sports games, barbecues, vacations, and get-togethers abound. We wanted to talk about this emerging health crisis and what we can do to get ahead of it. So to that end, I've invited onto the podcast Alvin Tedjo, Councillor for Mississauga, who also sits on the Peel Public Health Board, and Jill Promoli, Peel School Trustee and Advocate for Vaccinations. We talk about the state of the situation right now and what public health needs to do to educate the public on the efficacy of vaccinations and to encourage everyone to get vaccinated. Well, thank you, Councillor Alvin Tedjo from the fantastic city of Mississauga, as well as Jill Promoli, as well from the fantastic city of Mississauga, for coming on to the 905er today. To talk about this, I don't think we'd be here, but this is a public health emergency that's starting to creep more and more into the headlines, and I thought it's important for us to talk about it, especially as Peel is one of these hotspots. I'm gonna use that term to describe this. In case people somehow do not know what we're talking about, we are referring to, of course, to the rising number of measles cases emerging across the province, and as well, Peel is one of these public health units that is just seeing an upward tick of measles cases. Alvin, I want to start with you. Maybe just kind of paint a picture of Peel, what Peel's doing, what Peel's facing, and what the concerns are from a public health standpoint in Peel at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, Peel Region is the second largest municipality in Ontario. It's actually the third largest municipality in all of Canada. We have 1.6, 1.7 million people. So often you see a lot of these things happening around big cities like Toronto. But when you put Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon together, you actually get quite a bit of numbers here, and it's very concerning because where the outbreaks have been happening are in very public spaces. So in the emergency room over at Credit Valley, in the Central Library just across the street from City Hall, and some other health clinics that we have in and around the city of Mississauga specifically. It's normally, in a normal year, 1 to 2 cases. We've been jumping into the hundreds, and I think Jill will talk a little bit more about the more broader provincial numbers. But it's wild in terms of how quickly and how drastically larger it is this year than it has been in previous years. This is the most cases we've seen in over a decade, and the infection rate seems to be considerably faster because people are getting exposed. And what we want people to do is basically make sure that they're vaccinated, make sure they're checking their records, Really, you just need 2 doses if you were born after 1970. Anyone who might suspect that they could be infected need to immediately isolate themselves and contact Peel Public Health. We don't actually want them going straight to the hospital because we don't want them infecting other people. And then they can talk to a Peel Public Health worker. They can call 311, and they can sort of see where they are. Because a lot of symptoms don't present themselves for a week up to 4 weeks after they get infected. So, or sorry, 7 to 21 days. So 1 to 3 weeks. But they can get a fever, they can get cough, they can get runny nose, red watery eyes, and then the rash, which what you see on in pictures quite a bit. So this is something we're taking very seriously. The Region of Peel is meeting as the Public Health Board in the next coming days to talk about how we can basically stem the tide of this. But a lot of it is basically education and prevention. And this is something that we know we can defeat, and we've done for decades ago, and has come up through, vaccine hesitancy and misinformation that's online. And so, yeah, it's troubling right now.
I do want to highlight just from your notes there, the communicability of this disease is off the charts. I'm sure there's a doctor epidemiologist out there who can quote me the statistics exactly, but I remember reading in the paper a visit to a Costco out here near Hamilton. There's a visit to a Costco which led to a number of other cases. Just an everyday trip to go get groceries, infected person just pass on to, I think you can pass on to almost 18 other people within just one step. And I just want people to understand, like, this is a very highly communicable disease. Jill, I wanted to bring you in because I know your background. You are a fierce advocate of vaccinations. During the pandemic, I remember seeing a lot of you were very fiercely posting to encourage people to protect themselves using vaccines. Can you give us your insight and your knowledge on this? Because I know you're very active on this one. Can you kind of give us your messaging on the importance of vaccinations and the reason why these vaccines are gonna, can protect us this time around as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people might be familiar with me because I have been advocating in this space since 2016 at this point. So just a quick background. In 2016, we actually lost one of our children to a school flu outbreak. And so he had been vaccinated, but we know that the flu vaccine is not it's not as effective as most vaccines simply because the flu is a moving target. It's a very unstable virus, which means that from the start of flu season and even earlier from when they begin to identify what flu viruses are, which strains they think are going to be moving through a population, it changes so much. And so it makes it very difficult to formulate an effective vaccine in a season because it's such a guessing game. And so they're pretty good at that game considering how quickly it shifts. But it can't be like right on target because it does change so much. And it's especially tough to it's tough for kids under the age of 2 and for seniors to really establish immunity. Kids, especially under the age of 2, have a harder time developing immunity from a flu shot. And so that's why it's important that we do what we can to build community immunity. So while vaccines like the flu shot might not be as effective for the level of immunity we get from a measles vaccine, they can still be helpful. But when we're talking about the measles vaccine, that is a very stable virus. It's something that just does not change the way that influenza viruses do. And so we have been vaccinating people against measles since the 60s. And when you take a look at charts from the rates of infection for measles going back to all those decades when they started keeping track of measles cases, until the 60s when a vaccine started to become available, it's just such a severe drop off. It's almost like measles just didn't exist. Like it was still kind of floating around out there, but now we're at a point where it's actually possible to fully eliminate measles, and that's why it's so rare to come across it. Those of us of our generation are so fortunate. We really didn't grow up with it the way that previous generations did because most of us are vaccinated. And so even those people who maybe weren't vaccinated against it, they're still protected because it's such a strong vaccine that it puts up it puts up walls that prevent the virus from circulating through the population. And so with 2 doses of the measles vaccine, it gives a 97% effectiveness rate, which means that it's the gold standard. It's the best vaccine out there. Even if you've only had that single dose, and as some earlier generations only had the 1 dose, that's still 93% effective, which is still an extremely strong vaccine. But what we're seeing right now is that there's a lot of people who are behind on their vaccines, or who maybe are a little bit more hesitant to move forward on childhood vaccination. And so we have a lot more holes in that vaccine safety net, which is what's allowing measles to circulate through our population right now. And so we have a serious challenge.
I want to kind of touch upon that. Measles, people think of it as, it's a childhood illness, right? You get it when you're sick, you get a rash, you get over it, and you're immune for the rest of your life. It's a kid's sickness. Do you get the sense that we maybe have a bit of a sense of complacency about it, that it's not that serious of a disease, that this isn't something we should be taking that seriously. Get over yourself, like suck it up and deal with it. Is there a sense of that kind of going around I'm not going to say Peel, I'm going to say around the province right now, that you're saying? Jill, I'm going to let you chime in first, but I can see Alvin's itching to say something, so he'll come in afterwards.
100%. And it's funny because even when you talk to people from earlier generations who grew up with measles in a way that we haven't, they're like, oh, I don't know what the big deal is. We all had it as kids and we're still here. That's survivor bias, because they're still here, but some of their siblings and classmates aren't, because measles is actually quite serious. And so it's something that, in reality, most people who get measles will survive it. They will recover and they'll be okay. But it's not everybody, and it can be quite serious. It can cause lifetime permanent disability, and in the worst case, it does actually kill people. So we're not vaccinating against diseases like measles or really anything just because it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. We're vaccinating against these things because when we don't, people die. And so that's why it's so important that we're keeping in mind, like, we don't go through the process and the expense of vaccination just for fun and because it's a rash, and nobody likes getting a rash and not feeling well for a couple days or whatever. It's because it's actually quite serious.
And really, just to build on what Joe was saying there, Joel, is that it's the most vulnerable who are at risk, right? It's the people under 1, the kids under 1, and seniors and older people who are most vulnerable, and people who are already immunocompromised. So yeah, if you're strong and healthy, you're going to survive it most likely. But don't you care about your friends, your family, your neighbors? And we live in a society where we have to work with other people and we have to interact with other people, and we want to keep them safe too. I mean, I remember we were talking about masking. It wasn't necessarily about protecting yourself. It was about protecting other people from you, right? And you could just be a carrier, and you could infect other people who are more vulnerable than you are. And I think we have a duty of care to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent people who are more vulnerable from getting sick. Now, my wife happens to be an emergency room nurse at Sick Kids, and we'll talk about not just the unfortunate casualties of people who are more vulnerable, or who the vaccine doesn't work for, or even if they were vaccinated and they're part of that 3% that doesn't actually work. But the suffering they go through too is not fun, right? And the lasting impacts that Jill was talking about, again, are there. They're scars for life. And so if it's as simple as making sure that everybody has access to that vaccine so they can take it, so they can protect each other, then I don't know why we wouldn't do it. I think one of the challenges right now, and I will go on this till the day I die, is the amount of misinformation that is out there, and that we need to be challenging it every step of the way. And that, we shouldn't be even entertaining the idea of these measles parties or whatever it is, because it's just ridiculous. People don't understand. The science has been proven for the last 60 years. We need to be advocating and pushing everyone we can as much as possible that this is serious, and that we have the solution already, and it's just a matter of understanding that and implementing it. Like, it's something that's mind-boggling to people who are in the healthcare profession, or people like Jill who've had to live through this, knowing that it's just a matter of changing our behavior in order to prevent this from happening again. It's not like we need a new medical discovery. We already did this.
Well, that's an excellent segue into my next line of questioning, and let's just talk about the elephant in the room, and that is COVID-19. We just got out of a global pandemic where the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine was on the front of minds for a good number of years. Um, we got out of that pandemic because people such as you and I and millions of others took the vaccine to get that herd immunity up to a level where we could end the lockdowns, conduct our business, see friends and family again. I'm not bringing this up because I'm expecting this measles outbreak to elevate. I hope it doesn't elevate to that level, knock on wood. But the lessons that we should have been taking away from COVID-19, I'm struggling to understand why is this, why are we here? Why is it this such a fight now to get this childhood illness, something that you yourself, Alvin, said usually it's like 1 or 2 cases a year. We're now up towards, I'm looking at the Toronto Star, 572 measles cases as of March 26 is what the Ontario Public Health is stating. Why are we in this situation is the question I have. And I'm not blaming you, Alvin. Lord knows it's your paycheck, but you're on the public health board of Peel. Can you give us some insight into like why are we here?
Yeah, I kind of want to go back a little bit to the idea, the misinformation that's been out there. Um, I don't know if it was the lockdown itself, but it exposed COVID exposed the vulnerabilities that we had in the public health system, and the rapidity in which we were able to create a vaccine and roll it out created, I guess, more doubt. And I would argue that the seeds were planted for years before that because and I think Jill can talk about the numbers in school boards in terms of how they've been going down steadily over the last couple of years, even before COVID. But it was this complacency of, well, this hasn't really been a problem. Why do we still need to do this? Right. And so if you're seeing the MMR or the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine as something that's superfluous, you don't really need it because you don't know anyone who's had measles, mumps, or rubella. You don't even know what rubella is. Um, so then you're kind of thinking like, what is this? This seems to be like an old thing that doesn't really matter anymore. And then you see the internet qualify opinions as equals when one is science and one is not. And we don't do enough as a public health board or as a province and as a healthcare system to sort of combat it and say, listen, this is not a partisan issue. This is about your health and your safety and real science. And I think we needed to take a harsher stance to nip those things in the bud as they were developing, and to counteract it because you can't let that doubt grow and fester against the proven science that's not, uh,
I
brand new, right? This
I
is
I
this is still thing here.
I do want to ask this question of you because I'm going to be truthful to both of you. You were not my first invites on to talk about this topic. I did reach out to a number of medical officers of health across various public health units in the 905. Not one of them wanted to come on. And I don't know if that's a policy that they don't want to talk about this, but I find there is a reluctance. And I even asked Kieran Moore. I didn't think I'd get him on, but whatever. But I do find there's a reluctance to the medical community to come out and to be a little bit more forceful on this, to say the science works. The science is sound. Vaccines work. They're the best line of defense against these outbreaks and whatnot. And maybe this is me just being a little bit biased, a little bit unprofessional, but so be it. It's my show. I find it frustrating because I think I want to get these people on there, the people who have the science, who have the background, who have the expertise, to share their knowledge, especially when it comes to public health. I'm not, Alvin, is there a reluctance on the part of our medical officers of health or our public officers of health to come out and spearhead this conversation? I think we need to have as a community.
Yeah, real short answer, absolutely. They don't want to overexpose themselves. They got death threats. Some of them needed security. I've seen and heard stories of these medical officers of health's like quality of life when they were on TV and talking about things. And you just look at the social media, like it's
Right.
it's awful. They're not politicians. They did not expect to have to deal with something like that. But it is up to our leaders to make sure that they're defending that as well. And just one really quick, funny story, because my wife will always say when she knows somebody comes in with a kid that hasn't been vaccinated and the exact thing happened and that person has been infected, and then their parent will panic and say, I need you to do everything you can and give them all the modern medicine that exists to treat this. And you're just like, well, actually, it was this vaccine that you refused to take. The science in this is, not even as advanced, like is way more advanced than all these other things that you're talking about. This was the real treatment, but they're hesitant to do that. But yeah, I mean, the public has just not rallied enough around this to protect the medical officers of health from this abuse and to make sure that everybody feels comfortable talking about the science in an open way.
Jill, do you want to comment in on that? Just the dialogue around the science behind vaccinations that, this seems like a weird conversation that we can't have on public health and public safety.
Yeah. You know what, going into the pandemic, I knew it was going to go one of two ways. We were already having challenges with vaccine confidence before the pandemic. I remember in 2019, I actually gave a deputation to the Toronto Board of Health, and that could be a whole other podcast, just that experience. We were in some challenges already at that point where we were seeing declining uptake when it came to even just these, time tested vaccines like MMR and various other ones. And let alone things like the flu shot, which is something that we ask people to have faith in every single year. But we had some challenges already. So when the pandemic started, my first thought was this is going to go one of two ways. We're either going to come out of this with a better understanding and appreciation for the way that our health and lives rely on each other, or we're going to go completely the other way, and people are going to really shove away public health efforts and measures. And I think what we've seen is a real division on the way that people land coming out of the last years that we've all been through together. Nobody had a playbook in the way that we were going to handle this. I think right in the beginning, I think a lot of people were very grateful for our medical officers of health and the way that they're handling things. But I think there was just so much stress and anxiety around the pandemic in general that at some point people took those frustrations out on the people who were just trying to find measures to keep them safe and alive. And at some point that lack of faith, that lack of trust starts to kick in, and they're just thinking, I don't understand what the big deal is. And especially if people were feeling that economic pressure that was coming out of it, because a lot of people were out of work, their businesses were getting shut down. Depending on where you lived, you were either in a region where you weren't supposed to see your family, or across the street, life was basically normal. And I mean, that was kind of the way things were here in Peel. Like I live in Mississauga, and I have friends who live not quite across the street in Oakville, but like in Oakville, where there's across the street where businesses would be open on one side and closed on the other, and for months and months and months. We had some of the longest lockdowns in the country, and that was really hard on people. And so where we are now is that we've got this real work to do to rebuild that trust and confidence, because that's the challenge, is that people have decided they're done. They don't want to have these conversations about public health anymore because they are, I hesitate to use the word trauma, except I think trauma is the correct word here, because people were so devastated by it, by not being able to see friends and family, by missing life events, by not being able to go to funerals, by their kids having such a disrupted several years in school. And everyone was doing the best they could just to keep everyone safe and alive. But we also have to recognize that, people are going to feel things on the other side too. And the biggest thing that we have to remember with public health measures is they only work if people buy into them, if they are interested in coming along with you. And we were losing that trust and confidence the longer that things continued on with the pandemic. And that's where you really started to see more anger. But the two most powerful tools that we have in public health are information and trust. And we've got work to do on both of those. We need to make sure that people are hearing the information that they need so they can protect themselves and communities at large. But we need to make sure that they are trusting the sources that they're getting it from too.
We're coming up on the end, and there was one area that I did want to touch upon, and that is in the realm of public schooling, in that A lot of people are wondering about, you know, when you want to put your kid into a public school, the public school board asks for a vaccination record and to keep it up to date. I don't know if either of you can comment directly on this. I don't know, Alvin, if you could, but the idea would just be have the the Peel School Board, or I guess all the school boards, enforce the mandates, really force it. Get your MMR to let your child sit in a publicly funded classroom. Is that something we just need to really kind of clamp down on and get? Because I know some boards are timid to enforce that. I know in my school board, they are enforcing it. I got a letter saying get your kid vaccinated. So is that a kind of a way forward, just to good old fashioned get your kids vaccinated to get them into a public school?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jill answer most of this because she's the school board trustee. But from my experience as well, my kids go to school in Halton there too, Joel. And you get that letter, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. I got to update these things," and we go and do it as quickly as possible. But the problem is the exemption. You get that letter, and then if you don't believe in this, if you are hesitant for vaccines, you can sign that sort of saying, my conscience declares that I don't believe in this and I don't want my kids to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So then suddenly you have schools with maybe only 70% take up in terms of the vaccine, and that's not herd immunity, right?
Right.
So, disclaimer, I am a trustee, but I am not participating this in my capacity as a school trustee because I'm not the chair and cannot speak on behalf of the board. Disclaimer there. But just speaking when it comes to, to schools in general, Alvin's absolutely correct. And you will find that school boards do issue those letters. I am also a parent with Peel, and we've received those letters. And we received a letter for my older child, and they said, "Oh, you're missing this vaccine." I'm like, "How is that possible?"
Right.
And when I called my doctor's office, it was just actually that they had accidentally written something on the wrong line, and so it had just been misreported, and it was as simple as making a phone call over to Peel Public Health and getting it corrected. But it's true that yes, we have a list of required vaccines for attending schools, but you can also have an exemption. So there's two parts to that, right? And I think that that's where we come back to the biggest thing that we have to be working on is making sure that we're doing a better job educating people about the importance of vaccination, and making sure that they're trusting in the information that they're getting. And part of the challenge too is that so many of these kids who are in these younger years of education right now, they missed a lot of regular checkups during the pandemic. So I think that's a big part of the problem that we're having at this point, because they weren't going in for those times when they would get those regularly scheduled vaccines. And then what happens to their schedule? And so when we see that 70% of Ontario 7-year-olds don't have their MMR vaccine right now, I mean, that's where we're going to have a problem. And when we see how quickly it's moving, so from October 28th to March 13th, we had 372 cases of measles. And from March 13th to March 26th, we added another 200. So Joel, you're exactly right about the reproductive number. It's 12 to 18 people that you can pass it on to. A room remains infectious for up to 2 hours after a person with measles leaves it. It's something that is so easy to pass on. It's completely different than other illnesses that way. And so it's a real problem. And the incubation period is quite long. You typically see symptoms by 14 days, but you might not see them for a week or a little bit longer than that too. So.
And one of those cases, Joel, was at Pearson in Mississauga.
Yeah, right.
So imagine how many people you have to be like, were you there on these days? I mean, come on. Like,
Yeah,
we're
good
talking
luck to
about
you.
a place that has tens of thousands of people every day.
Yeah, absolutely. This will be my last question for this episode, and I'll throw it open to you, Alvin, first. Jill, you can follow up. But are you thinking that the province needs to do more here? Because while I have you on, because Peel is higher numbers, you're not the only public health board that's dealing with this crisis. Are you hoping to see a bit more of an effort put forward by the Ministry of Health to, whether it's a public relations campaign to encourage vaccination uptake, vaccination education, or just a change in policy that says, you can't opt out of a tax-funded public school? Are you, or what are you hoping to see from higher up the food chain, Alvin.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to see more leadership from the provincial government in a much, much, much larger way than they have been. Maybe the excuse has been they were in the caretaker convention for a few weeks for the provincial election, but that excuse doesn't stand anymore. And Sylvia Jones, who's the MPP for Caledon here in Peel, also happens to be the health minister and the deputy premier, and we do see her on a fairly regular basis. And we talk about a lot of things that we don't have enough of in terms of healthcare funding. But this seems to be a layup. This seems to be just a matter of talking about this as a priority, right? We're not asking for billions of dollars right now, specifically for this outbreak, but we are talking about leadership in terms of the public space, right? Having them talk about this as a serious issue and raising the alarm to get people vaccinated and to isolate the people where there are cases that exist so that we can prevent the spread of this even further. That is up to the province. We can't do that, and no health agency can do that. Health board can do that on their own. You need the sort of weight of the provincial government to step behind it and say that as part of their press conferences and their daily news briefings, so that people really understand that this is a problem that exists and one that the solution is their action, right? And that doesn't require any other, mass movement of immunization clinics or anything like that. That already exists. All the infrastructure exists for us to do this right now. The vaccines exist there for us right now. We just need people to act, and we need the province to lead the way.
Yeah, and Alvin, you're giving some generous leniency there, because this outbreak started on October 28th. So we were not in caretaker mode all the way back to then. This is something that needs to be an ongoing effort. We really didn't see much of a flu prevention campaign from the provincial government this year either. And that's something that's important every year. And we actually had a rough flu season again. And how much better could it have been if we actually had our government out there helping to remind people how important it is to take care of themselves and each other. So I listen, if I were in charge of everything, so let's just put on my Jill in charge hat for a moment, I would actually love to see a coordinated effort between the Ministries of Health and Education to make sure that we are delivering the information that every parent needs to have to ensure that their child is safe and will remain safe and well throughout the school system. This is actually not that hard. It's really easy to communicate with parents throughout Ontario. Every time it's popcorn day, I get 2 emails and a phone call. So when flu season comes around, it's easy to remind people, heads up, by the way, it's respiratory illness season. If you have any questions, go chat with your doctor. If your kid is sick, this is when you need to keep them home. This is a reminder of where you can find the link to the vaccine schedule. It's really easy to get this information to people. And the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health can do that, and it wouldn't even be expensive. This is a simple thing to do, and it would help make sure that everybody has the information that they need. And you can start it all the way from when babies are born. You can make sure that parents are getting that information straight out of the gate. But we're not doing that, because right now we have people who are just not serious about illness prevention. We have to do better. We have to recognize that the more that we're failing to prevent illness, the more that we are not just harming people's health, we're also making sure that schools can't operate as well, workplaces don't operate as well, and we're putting more and more burden on our healthcare system when we're failing to fund everything properly. So why don't we just do a much better job and stick to the old cliche? What is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let's just put a little bit more effort into prevention and make sure that we are keeping people well, and stop putting so much burden on people to carry this illness that we know is easy to prevent, especially the measles, because that is the simplest disease to prevent out of any of them. So anyway, there's my little rant. We can keep people safe, and it's not actually that hard.
Well, I will leave that as the last word then for this episode. Thank you very much, Alvin Tedjo, councillor from Mississauga, and Jill Promoli, vaccine advocate from Mississauga as well. Thank you both very much for taking the time to come on today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
us.
Jill.